Verse 9. I love this part. And returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. And now here's where we learn who these were. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. And listen to verse 11. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. I think that's wild. These women who'd been following Jesus, who'd been with them for years at this point, who honestly should have earned their trust by this point, they came home and they came and they told the tale, and they didn't believe them. They thought it was an idle tale. Oh, they're grief-stricken. They want it to be so. They had a group hallucination, which doesn't happen. It's like it's all of this kind of stuff. They didn't believe them. But it turns out these women, not only were they right, but these women, these were the first to proclaim the risen Jesus. These were the first to proclaim that God had raised Jesus from the dead. The tomb was empty. And this is an important historical fact when we think about the credibility of Luke's story. Historians, they judge credibility in a lot of different ways, but one of the tools they use is something called the criteria of embarrassment. And it just means this, in historical terms. If you're writing about a historical event, right, and you're writing about your own stuff, you present yourself in the best possible light. And you leave out embarrassing details. So when you read a historical event and the authors have included embarrassing details about themselves or about their leaders, that lends credibility to the story, because if you were making it up, you wouldn't include the embarrassing details. And there are two details here that are embarrassing, that fit that criteria for the first century church. The first is that women were the first to proclaim the resurrected Jesus. Now listen, this is a terrible thing. But at that time, in that culture, women's testimony was not trusted. And that was foolish. And they should trust women's testimony, but they didn't. Like in a court of law, if women came to testify, their testimony would not be valued, which is a terrible thing. But if we can put that aside for the moment and just go back to put ourselves in the shoes of the authors who were writing this, if they were making it up, they wouldn't include that women were the first to discover the tomb, because that, in that culture at that time, that would hurt their credibility. That would hurt their case. Does that make sense? Okay. The second embarrassing detail is that the apostles didn't believe them. If they were making this up, they would not have written this. What they would have written was that Peter was the first to discover the empty tomb, and he believed all along. And he was full of faith, and he was a lion, and nobody could stop him. He went with Jesus. You know, that's how they would write this. But that's not what they wrote. They wrote that women discovered the tomb and that the apostles were faithless unbelievers. And they didn't believe the story. Now, if you were to ask Luke, you might say, Luke, those details hurt the case you're trying to make in that first century audience. Why are you including them? And Luke would say, I'm including them because that's what happened. Because that's how it went down. And the criteria of embarrassment, it lends credibility to the gospel story. What Luke has written to us, he has written us the truth because he included all of the embarrassing details.